Hola amigos! Coming up in this episode...
These ruins of Qenko are some of the most mysterious in all of Peru. On the left you can see a Spanish wall made from irregular stones and mortar, but on the right you can see a much neater and tightly fitting Inca wall. So I set up my tripod and Gigapan, and my little Ricoh GX200 started taking a panorama. So I'm in Cusco, Peru, and I want to do one more test ride before setting off for Patagonia. Angelo suggested we ride up to Qenko, an archaeological park behind Sacsayhuaman, and I wanted to ride up to Cerro Pikchu to do a Gigapan. It looked like rain, but ironically I was looking forward to rain so I could test out my wet weather gear, including the hurriedly made handmade covers for my bags and top box. Anyhow, we set off. Here we are going under the Blue Bridge, down Avenida de la Cultura again. I've got extra weight today as a test, and you can hear me ride the clutch a bit here. Starting to go uphill. Hey, did you see that? Someone threw a bucket of water out of the second floor apartment. See, Angelo still doesn't have rear vision mirrors. He has to keep looking back over his shoulder to see if I'm still following him and he hasn't lost me. See, this dog comes after me and not Angelo. Here is the turn-off. Some carved rocks there on the right. My immediate thoughts were that the bike had passed another test because I loaded it up with a couple of backpacks with weight in them, because I hadn't ridden a bike, fully loaded up with all that extra weight, and I just wanted to be sure if the bike was capable of it and if I could handle, manoeuvring and everything, and I didn't seem to notice any difference at all, hardly. These ruins of Qenko are some of the most mysterious in all of Peru. Kenko means labyrinth, zigzag, or serpentine passageway, but its original name is unknown. In episode 7 I explained how Puma iconography is an integral part of Cusco, and here there are two stone gnomons who cast a shadow that looks a lot like a puma's head on the winter solstice. Inside one of these outcrops there's a cave with a stone altar where humans and animals were sacrificed. Embalming also took place here, and it's possible that Pachacutec, the Inca who built Machu Picchu, his mummified cadaver was stored and worshipped here. But it gets even stranger. There is a huge phallic stone which can still be seen, which was part of a fertility cult. And if that wasn't strange enough, this sacred site was attended by priests that were selected because they were twins, had been struck by lightning and survived, cripples or epileptics, because that was the tradition of the Incas. On the way back, we stopped here to admire the view. And this little boy was quite curious. The sun had only been out a little while, but it had already dried all the mud and turned it into this fine dust. We're 5 kilometres from the centre here. What a view! Note the fake Inca stonework on that building on the right, while there's real Inca stonework on the left. Because my action cam has a very wide angle, things look further away than they really are, which means I almost hit this guy that was running around the corner. Luckily I've got third-party insurance which would cover him, but I don't have any insurance that would cover me. If I get injured, I don't have any medical insurance covering myself. On the left we have Coca-Cola, while on the right we have Cola Real, which means Royal Cola. Here we're turning off Recoleta from the other direction. You see in the black paint there, that's graffiti in Quechua. On the left you can see a Spanish wall made from irregular stones and mortar, but on the right you can see a much neater and tightly fitting Inca wall. Now this little plaza is called Limek Pampachika, which means big space or square for the speaker. In the time of the Inca it was where disputes were heard and tried to be resolved. Kind of like a court of petty sessions. The next one that we're going to go around the corner on the right is called Limek Pampachika, the small speaker's space, and it was kind of like a high court for problems that couldn't be resolved in the lower court, or Limek Pampachika. You'll notice the Inca stonework on the right is very fine. It was an old Inca palace, and it's regarded as some of the finest Inca stonework that was ever made. Those dressed up women with llamas, they're just there for tourists. They charge $1 or $2 to get your photo taken with them. The reason there were so many palaces was the Incas were into ancestor worship, and the Inca ruler, after he died, his servants maintained his mummy and kept the palace functioning, and the new emperor made a new palace somewhere else. The final doorway, the blue one on the right, today that houses Scotiabank automatic telemachines. And that cream building is a mini mall named after the Peruvian singer Ima Sumac. This is Avenida El Sol, which is one of the main carriageways in Cusco. But in the time of the Inca, it was a river which was later put into a drain and covered over. Now we're coming into the main plaza, which in the time of the Inca was twice as large, and it was called Huakaipata, which means place of tears or wailing, and I'll tell you why. Now, if this plaza could speak, what tales it would tell. There are chronicles that record that up to 100,000 llamas were sacrificed here during annual festivals. The Inca high priests would extract the lungs of the llamas, blow in them to inflate them, and then read them, much like a gypsy might read tea leaves to prophesy the future. And on certain anniversaries, the mummies of the previous Inca kings were brought out, seated, fed, and ritually bathed as if they were still alive. One chronicle attests that a so-called woman of the sun was sacrificed to Inti, the sun god. The unfortunate woman was often the sister or daughter of a high-ranking Inca ruler. Strangely enough, the same chronicles tell us that sometimes the sacrificial victims suffered voluntarily, believing they were destined for a better place. But if all that sounds barbaric, you'd be shocked to read Father Molina's report of almost 500 years ago, where he recounts young children from all over the Inca Empire had their beating hearts ripped out from their chests in this same plaza. And any doubt that the Spanish were inventing these stories to discredit the Inca religion have sort of evaporated since they found some mummies of child sacrifices on mountaintops. They have been traced back to Cusco during the reign of Pachacutec, who the chronicles say was responsible for beginning these child sacrifices, and whose statue stands today in the same plaza. That hill in the distance, its altitude is 3,800 metres, and that's our destination. And that hill has an interesting connection with archaeoastronomy, which I'll talk about when we get there. There's the town hall where I saw Evo Morales speak, which I spoke about in a previous episode. It does seem like there's a church on every corner, at least in the old part of Cusco. Looks like a tradie getting on the back of that bus. Check out the black diesel smoke coming out of the back of that bus. I read somewhere it's a combination of the altitude, bad tuning, and low quality diesel fuel, and it's bad for everybody's lungs. Note this black car goes straight through a red light, and it too engulfs us in a lungful of black diesel exhaust. But some Peruvians are safety conscious. Check out that gas delivery motorbike guy. He's got a big orange flag on the back of his bike so he can be seen. Another sweeping curve, another Inca wall. Now we are starting to leave the centre and rise in altitude a bit. This white tower coming up is clearly visible from Cusco's main plaza. I always wondered what it would look like close up. Looks like it's also built upon Inca foundations. Well, we've caught up with the gas delivery guy, there he is. You see the drums on the road ahead? It's a fraternidad, a Catholic brotherhood. I've never ventured into this part of Cusco. People always said it was a bit dangerous in these barrios, but it actually looks pretty safe. There's something I didn't expect to see, a railway level crossing up on this hill. Turning off here. As you can see, it's getting less densely populated. At least the road is paved. We're on the edge of a rural zone. Check out the sheep grazing there. Now I've got the feeling we're nearing the end of this winding ride and we'll pull up somewhere here and I'll set up for a Gigapan. Wow, what a view! Angelo really took me to the best place for a sweeping vista of the city of Cusco. It's the perfect place to set up my tripod and shoot a wide-angle panorama. I was a little bit worried about being robbed or my camera getting wet, so I only brought my little pocket camera, 12 megapixel Ricoh GX 200. Almost finished. The end result was okay, not a true Gigapan, rather a high-resolution panorama, but it turned out pretty good. Here is the end result. There is the Cristo Blanco, which we rode to the other day, and there's the Plaza de Armas of Cusco. Now, if we can see them, then obviously they can see us down there. Even though these days the hill is covered in telecommunications towers, in the days of the Inca, there were stone towers on that hill. The chronicles tell us that Pachacutec, who was renowned for expanding the empire and great civil engineering construction works, ordered some towers were built on the horizon of the hills to the east and to the west, at the point where the sun rises and at the point where it sets, which is this hill, because it's to the west of the Plaza de Armas. Because we're in the tropics, the hours of the day don't vary much between the seasons, but the sun swings across the horizon and in its rising and setting by a very large angle. Many ancient people, including the Incas, knew that, and they set up these pillars as a kind of giant sundial, not to mark the hours, but the days and the weeks, the months. By sheer coincidence, today is the 12th of February, and tomorrow the 13th will be the solar zenith in Cusco. And it's known that one of these Sukankas, they were called, these towers, aligned with the solar zenith. It actually happens twice a year. Only happens in the tropics. You get the sun directly 90 degrees above. The Incas being sun worshippers, it was a very important date. Pachacutec's grandson, Huakaipata, also built some kind of temple here in honour of his mother, where sacrifices were made. And it was listed as a Waka sacred site on the 9th Seki, one of the sacred walking trails that radiate out from Cusco in many directions. Unfortunately, as that reference says, the Jesuits owned that land, and they probably used all the building stone to build a church down on the plaza. Although a few solar towers exist in other parts of Peru, as was so often the case when the conquistadors met the Incas, there's only vague, often conflicting written word descriptions of how many towers they were and what they look like, and a few very fanciful illustrations drawn centuries later. With storm clouds brewing and it was starting to spit a bit, we decided to head downhill. But you know, coming from a different direction, if you're not familiar with the area, it's really easy just to forget that you've already ridden up that road. Here is the gas depot where the motorbike gas delivery guy with the orange flag was parked. Looks completely different coming from a different direction at a different time of day, especially when you don't know the area, although I have descended this road before.
I didn't recognise that we were travelling down Avenida de la Raza, which is where I had the serious accident detailed in a previous episode. We stopped here, I had a look around. They weren't really cobblestones, they were like polished flagstones, and I still don't know how it felt like something just took the handlebars and made me have the accident. And also happened the same to my friend Cristo in his VW Combi. But I need to add here, after I made that episode, I was talking to an Irishman who runs a hostel where that blue door is on the left. And he said he thinks the place is haunted. I don't believe in ghosts, but I just thought I'd add that little anecdote.
The last task of the day was to fill up with petrol because we were heading for the Chilean border in a couple of days. Back to home sweet home La Estrelita, but not for much longer. I also mounted this white plastic box, my idea being to put an auxiliary battery there to run my laptop and charge my cameras if I'm camping. I installed the cable, but I haven't bought a second battery yet. I'd only done 257 kilometres of riding on this new bike, but I was itching to leave. But I had one little more job to do the night before I left at Cusco's Cross Keys British pub. My friend Elizabeth, the manager of the South American Explorers Club Cusco branch, wanted me to help her run the weekly trivia quiz night. Being the 14th of February, most of the questions were about Valentine's Day. I had spent so long in Cusco, I had friends on each one of the different teams. But in the end, it was the team with Kevin and Christo that won, bottle of wine, but they also had something for me.
What's that?
Turtle, the message of the writer.
What is it? Is it for me?
Yeah.
Good rate.
Buen viaje. Regresa ya.
Why did you give me a turtle?
You get it? It's a message to go slow.
Come out of your shell.
Enjoy the ride. Come out of your shell.
Because you tortoise everything out.
Coming up in the next episode.
So the plan for day one was to ride almost 400 kilometres south to Puno on Lake Titicaca. Angelo only needed that one bag for 6 days. This is what I thought I needed for 6 months. Angelo said to look out for thieves at the traffic lights, but the trucks were more of a danger and all these muddy potholes. We had arrived right in the middle of Puno's Carnival.
Gringo Loco asks,
Hit the subscribe button.
please subscribe.